Welcome back to Crossroads. President Trump is taking on two separate headlines about his relationship with Vladimir Putin and Russia. Again, here's correspondent Serena Marshall with the latest from Washington.
The president on the defense over the Russia investigation.
Not only did I never work for Russia, I think it's a disgrace that you even asked that question, because it's a whole big fat hoax.
The denial following a shocking revelation in the New York Times that following FBI Director James Comey's firing, the FBI opened a counterintelligence investigation into whether the president had been working on behalf of Russia against American interests, triggered by the president's behavior before and after Comey's dismissal, including this Oval Office meeting, when he reportedly told Russia's foreign minister at the time about the firing, "I faced great pressure because of Russia. That's taken off." This, as a separate blockbuster headline in the Washington Post, claims the president went to extraordinary lengths to hide his private conversations with President Putin. Following their private 2017 meeting during the G20 summit, Mr. Trump even reportedly confiscated his own interpreter's notes, keeping them from administration officials. Democrats searching for answers and may try to get them from the only American to witness the sit-down, the president's interpreter.
You know, there's so many questions raised. Why is he so chummy with Vladimir Putin?
Two House committees considering a subpoena, but White House counselor Kellyanne Conway says the reason he was so protective of that conversation...
We're always concerned about leaks, obviously, particularly national security leaks.
Today, when asked if he'd turn over the interpreter's notes from meetings with the Russian leader...
That was a very good meeting. It was actually a very successful meeting.
The president wouldn't give a direct answer.
And that was Serena Marshall reporting. To discuss, let's bring in from Minneapolis, former prosecutor and CIA officer Jack Rice, and here with us in studio, Republican strategist Kenneth Del Vecchio. Jack, first on the FBI counterintelligence investigation, President Trump says that those who were involved in calling for this were, quote, scoundrels and dirty cops. What's your reaction?
No, I disagree completely. I mean, one of the problems we find, and I've seen this as a prosecutor and as a defense attorney, if you don't have the law on your side, you go after the facts in this case, or you go after the delivery person. And that's exactly what the president has been doing. The problem is we're talking about a lot of people who have worked very, very hard. They're apolitical. They're trying to come up with answers when it comes to this issue. And this was based upon some very objective and very peculiar behavior by this president and this presidential candidate. So their decision to go down this path was not something they did lightly. It was something they were very conscious about, and they knew they were going to catch a lot of heat. So they were going to be careful, and I think they were.
Ken, what do you make of the same report? Could it suggest that there is some anti-Trump bias within the FBI if they really came close to investigating whether the president really worked for Russia?
As a former prosecutor, former judge, and a criminal defense attorney, I have to say that I completely disagree with Jack. Although I allowed him for being part of both of the CIA and the FBI formerly, I completely disagree with him. You go after people who falsely accuse you. And if police and prosecutors are falsely accusing you, then you come back and say that they're wrong. I want to make a really important threshold point here. There is no such thing as a crime of collusion unless you are committing unlawful acts while colluding. Very, very specifically, it is not illegal for an American citizen to collude with nationals from other countries like Russia to do anything, including influencing election, unless they commit crimes with it, like identity theft, bank fraud,
or hacking the
hacking.
DNC, sir. Yeah.
But Ken, would you agree then there's also nothing wrong with if the FBI is suspicious and feels like there's some unusual behavior to launch a counterintelligence investigation? And it appears it didn't go anywhere. Otherwise, we would have heard about it by now. So there was no harm, no foul in this case,
I absolutely agree with you. If the FBI or any law enforcement agency has probable cause to believe that a crime may be committed, they can arrest somebody. But short of probable cause, if they have a good faith belief that a crime may be committed, they can investigate. I don't see this as new news. I see this as just as some part of the ongoing hit on Donald Trump, trying to tie him to Russia. I haven't seen any evidence that ties him to committing any crimes with Russia.
Jack, do you understand why a report of this kind could serve as red meat to people who believe this is a hoax, this is a witch hunt?
Without question, I understand why one would do that. And honestly, that's one of the reasons the Bureau had to be careful on something like this. They had to know that there was going to be people coming at them. They had to know the political heat that would come, especially when you start looking at a sitting president. They had to know that this was the case. And yet at the same time, when you start seeing behavior that's like this, when you see some of the decisions that the president was making, some of those very strangely, what he was doing in the Oval Office, some of the things he was doing on the sanctions issue. And then certainly what he talked about with Lester Holt, you start going down this long list. It's reasonable to start asking questions. What I think makes this somewhat unique, though, is what we have heard previously is that the investigation had to do more broadly with the Trump team, those who were surrounding the president, those who were sort of in the satellite. The difference here is we're talking very specifically about what this president and what this presidential candidate himself was doing.
I don't see anything different than what's been brought up already, Jack. This is the same rhetoric being spewed out in a different way.
Well, one thing that is different, and that is the second story, and that is the idea that Donald Trump, as president, confiscated the notes of his interpreter, which nobody at the White House denies. If, in fact, as the president says, these meetings with Vladimir Putin were so successful and accomplished so much, then why not have the White House go ahead and release the interpreter's notes to Congress so they can see how successful it was?
I don't see anything odd in that, because I agree with Trump when he's saying that there are many meetings with foreign leaders that are kept completely private between those leaders. I'm going to have to use something from my own life directly on this. One of my movies called Price for Freedom opens up with Ronald Reagan with his interpreter meeting with the ambassador from Iran in Switzerland, and Reagan specifically told that ambassador that we're going to start bombing the hell out of Iran if you don't release our hostages, starting with you, the ambassador's home. That was held private for years and years and years, and we uncovered that years later and put it in the movie. So I don't see anything unusual.
Jack, your thoughts? Is it legitimate that certain one-on-one meetings between world leaders be kept 100% confidential?
Yeah, that's a problem. And the reason I completely disagree in this case is there's something called institutional knowledge. There is a need, not just when a president meets with a foreign dignitary, it's also about what the intelligence community around them and his own intelligence people understand, because it's about more than what this president does. It's about the presidency and it's about the country. And so if he says something, if he does something, it's important to understand the context ourselves so we know where we're going next, how it's working. We understand, and the reports have come out, that even his own people were trying to figure out what was going on in the meetings and had no idea. This is one of the reasons that we have this information. It's not so the media can spy on him. It's not so it comes out on Twitter or it comes out on Facebook. This is about making sure that when you actually have a policy, hold on, let me finish. That policy was about establishing what was going on. No, actually, this is fundamentally different. This is about going much further than just what this president does in one particular instance. It's about making sure that the policy that's being implemented by the country is consistent with that and that has been looked at all levels to make sure you're doing it appropriately. And when you don't do that, you don't get that.
The soliloquy you're stating sounds good, but it's completely impractical and unbelievable, because Congress itself has all kinds of private hearings. Singular members of Congress have particular private hearings, and presidents have private meetings all the time.
Well, here's the question, Jack. Is there a mechanism that Congress can pursue, and maybe it's just a select committee, or maybe if it's a classified hearing, where instead of the translator's notes being released to the general Congress, where it'll be released to the public immediately, but it's held only to those top members of the Intelligence Committee so they can see exactly what the president said according to the translator?
Okay, good idea.
Well, that is the point. I mean, the point is you got to at least make sure that somebody gets a hold of this so they know where they're going. It's not just about one guy, one man, one woman who's running the country. Remember, there's an entire country and an apparatus underneath them that needs to understand how to actually apply that. And if you don't know what's going on, you simply can't do that. This isn't just a private meeting between two people that sits in a vacuum. It has to get way beyond the vacuum.
Okay,
that's just the process.
I have one final question. Then you would agree then that for the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judiciary, meaning the Supreme Court, that each one of them should have that same checks and balances, and the president should know every single thing that Congress is doing and the Supreme Court is doing, and the Supreme Court should know everything that Congress and the president is doing. If you say that, I agree with you. Otherwise, it's unfounded.
I assume that's rhetorical.
No, I don't. No,
Jack,
not at all.
I have one yes or no question to you. Do you really think that when President Trump meets with Putin, he doesn't have the U.S. interest in mind? Could it be?
At this point, we have seen a lot of information, and he has made some statements and some arguments that have been inconsistent with American foreign policy since the 1940s.
Okay. Jack Rice and Ken Delvecchio, thank you both. I think if there's one agreement, all it is that, look, there should be somebody in the Congress that has access to these translators' notes. Shouldn't be released to the public, shouldn't be released to the media, but have somebody else other than the president and his interpreter know exactly what happened in that conversation. Even Ken Delvecchio agrees with me on that. Still, I had a controversial art exhibit in Israel is sparking violent protests from the country's Christian minority, and now even the artist wants the work taken down.